Imagine ancient Rome at its zenith, marble temples gleaming under the Mediterranean sun, senators debating in the forum, legions marching to conquer distant lands. But beneath this facade of imperial grandeur, something dark was festering, something that would culminate in one of history's most shocking scandals a night that involved 25 men, one empress, and a contest so outrageous it would echo through millennia. This is the story of Valeria Messalina, the woman history remembers as Rome's most notorious empress. But was she truly the monster ancient writers portrayed, or was she something far more complex? A woman trapped in a system that gave her a crown but denied her freedom, power but no autonomy, a throne but no voice. Tonight, we descend into the shadows of imperial Rome to uncover the truth behind the legend. The year is 41 CE. Emperor Caligula lies dead, assassinated by his own guards after 4 years of increasingly erratic and tyrannical rule. The Praetorian Guard, those elite soldiers sworn to protect the emperor, search the palace for survivors of the imperial family. They find one cowering behind a curtain, trembling with fear. His name is Claudius, 50 years old, plagued by physical disabilities that make him limp and stutter. For decades, his own family had hidden him away, embarrassed by his appearance, convinced he was mentally deficient. They couldn't have been more wrong. Behind that awkward exterior was one of Rome's finest minds, a scholar, a historian, fluent in Greek, obsessed with the minutiae of Roman law and tradition. But the Praetorian Guard doesn't proclaim him emperor because of his intellect. They choose him because he's weak, controllable, a puppet they can manipulate while they hold the real power. And so, the man everyone underestimated becomes the most powerful person in the world. There's just one problem. An emperor needs legitimacy. He needs heirs. He needs a wife. Enter Valeria Messalina. She's barely 16 years old when she marries Claudius. Beautiful, intelligent, from one of Rome's most prestigious families, the perfect political match. To the outside world, it's a fairy tale. A young girl becoming Empress of Rome. But look closer. This isn't a marriage. It's a transaction. A teenage girl, traded like property to secure political alliances. She has no say in the matter. No choice. She's given everything except what she truly needs, freedom. Claudius, obsessed with his books and his legal reforms, largely ignores her. She gives him to children Britannicus, and Octavian ensuring the succession. But motherhood at such a young age only deepens her isolation. She's surrounded by servants, guards, advisors, but she's utterly alone. And in that loneliness, something begins to change. By day, Messalina plays her role perfectly. She attends state ceremonies with a serene smile. She entertains foreign dignitaries with grace and charm. She's the very image of Roman virtue and imperial dignity. But at night, she becomes someone else entirely. Ancient sources describe her slipping out of the palace in disguise, wearing a blonde wig to hide her distinctive dark hair. She goes to the Suburra, Rome's red light district, to a particular brothel where she takes the name Lysiska, Shivolf in Greek. There, in a small room marked by a plaque bearing that name, the Empress of Rome presents her body to strangers. Modern readers often react with shock or disbelief. Why would the most powerful woman in Rome do such a thing? She had everything: wealth, status, power. But, in Roman society, women existed in legal limbo. They couldn't own property in their own name, couldn't vote, couldn't hold political office. Even as Empress Messalina was legally under the authority of men, first her father, then her husband, then potentially her son. Her sexuality was perhaps the only thing she could claim as truly her own. And in those pleasure rooms, stripped of a title and a crown, she found something she couldn't find in the palace: autonomy. Choice. The power to say yes or no based solely on her own desires, not political necessity. But Messalina wasn't just seeking personal liberation. She was also playing a far more dangerous game. She began hosting elaborate orgies at the palace, inviting Rome's most powerful men, senators, generals, wealthy merchants. These weren't just parties. They were intelligence-gathering operations. In the vulnerability of intimacy, powerful men revealed their secrets, their ambitions, their plots. Messalina collected these secrets like weapons. She used them to manipulate appointments, to destroy rivals, to accumulate power in a system that officially denied her any. She became one of the most influential people in Rome, not through legal authority, but through knowledge of everyone's darkest secrets. And then came the contest that would become legend. The story appears in multiple ancient sources, each telling it slightly differently, but the core remains the same. Messalina challenged Sila, Rome's most famous prostitute, to a sexual endurance contest. The rules were simple. Whoever could service more men in a single night would be declared the victor. Sila managed 25. Messalina, according to the sources, matched this number and wanted to continue, only stopping when dawn broke because she was physically exhausted but still, in the chilling words of Pliny the Elder, unsatisfied. 25 men. One night. The Empress of Rome. The story spread through the city like wildfire. It was whispered in the forum, joked about in taverns, recorded by scandalous historians. It became the defining image of Messalina, insatiable, shameless, monstrous in her appetites. But let's pause and think critically about this story. How much of it is actually true? Ancient Roman historians had a peculiar relationship with truth. They saw their role not as objective reporters, but as moral teachers. They exaggerated, embellished, and sometimes invented stories to make philosophical points about virtue and vice. Tacitus, our primary source for this period, was writing decades after Messalina's death. Suetonius loved scandalous gossip. Juvenal was a satirist who used hyperbole as a weapon, and all of them had a particular axe to grind. They were writing under later emperors who wanted to distance themselves from the supposedly degenerate Claudian dynasty. From a modern medical perspective, what they describe sounds consistent with hypersexuality disorder, genuine psychological condition often triggered by trauma, abuse, or severe emotional distress. For a woman married against her will at 16, denied autonomy, used as a political pawn, such behavior could represent a desperate attempt to reclaim control over her own body and desires. But there's another possibility. Maybe the story was entirely fabricated. A political hit job designed to destroy her reputation and justify what was about to happen next. Despite all her secret affairs and political manipulations, Messalina might have survived. Roman aristocrats had always been hypocritical about sexual morality. What was scandalous for women was expected of men. As long as she maintained appearances and didn't threaten the imperial succession, she might have continued her double life indefinitely. But then she fell in love. His name was Gaius Silius. Young, handsome, one of Rome's most prestigious senators, and considered the most beautiful man in Rome. Unlike her other affairs, this one was different. This one was real. This one mattered, and it terrified the people who actually ran Rome. Claudius had two powerful advisors, Narcissus and Pallas. Both were former slaves who had risen to become the emperor's closest confidants. They were the real power behind the throne, and they saw Messalina as a threat to their influence. When Messalina and Silius began their affair, Narcissus saw his opportunity, but he needed something undeniable, something so outrageous that even the passive Claudius would have to act. Then Messalina gave it to him. While Claudius was away at the port of Ostia, Messalina and Silius did the unthinkable. They got married. A public ceremony with witnesses, a feast, even formal marriage contracts. Whether this was an attempt at a coup, a genuine love match, or simply the act of a woman pushed beyond reason by years of confinement, we'll never know. But it was treason. Unambiguous, undeniable treason. Narcissus moved quickly. He rushed to Claudius at Ostia and presented the evidence. The emperor, that brilliant scholar who could recite obscure points of Roman law from memory, seemed utterly unable to comprehend what was happening. His wife had married another man while he was still alive. It was unprecedented, impossible. But it had happened. The executions began immediately. Silius was killed without trial. Messalina's closest associates and allies were hunted down and murdered. The freedmen who served her, the senators who attended her parties, the guards who looked the other way during her nocturnal escapades all fell to the sword. Messalina fled to the gardens of Lucullus, one of the few properties in her name. She was 22 years old, still young, still beautiful, still the mother of the emperor's children. Perhaps she thought he would spare her for their sake. Perhaps she hoped her children would plead for her life. She was wrong. Narcissus sent soldiers. According to Tacitus, when they arrived, Messalina tried to kill herself, but couldn't do it. Her mother, Lepida, who had barely spoken to her daughter in years, was there and urged her to die with dignity, but Messalina's hand shook. She couldn't complete the act, so the soldiers did it for her. A tribune of the Praetorian Guard stepped forward and drove his sword through her body. When news reached Claudius, he was at dinner. According to the sources, he showed no emotion. He simply called for more wine and continued eating. Whether this was shock, relief, or the complete emotional detachment of a man who had long ago stopped feeling anything, we'll never know. The Empress of Rome died in a garden, surrounded by strangers, unable even to end her own life. And the man she'd been married to for 6 years didn't even pause his meal. In the months and years that followed, Messalina's name became synonymous with depravity. Juvenal used her in his satires as the ultimate example of female vice. Tacitus described her as driven by reckless lust. Pliny mentioned her contest with Scylla as established fact. Her reputation was systematically destroyed by every subsequent historian. But here's what those historians rarely mentioned who benefited from her death. Narcissus and Pallas eliminated their primary rival for influence over Claudius. Within a year, they had arranged his marriage to his own niece, Agrippina the Younger. And Agrippina had her own son from a previous marriage, a boy named Nero. Agrippina had every reason to ensure Messalina was remembered as a monster. It justified her own position. It explained why Claudius's biological son, Britannicus, was passed over in favor of her son. It made the replacement of one empress with another seem not just acceptable but necessary. History, as they say, is written by the victors. And in this case, the victors needed Messalina to be a villain. Modern historians have begun to reassess her story. They point out the obvious biases in ancient sources. They note that male emperors who engaged in similar or worse behavior to Tiberius, Caligula, Nero are often treated with a kind of fascinated horror rather than pure moral condemnation. Their sexual exploits are seen as symptoms of absolute power, corrupting absolutely. But when a woman seeks sexual freedom, she becomes something else entirely. Not corrupted by power, but corrupted by nature. Not tragic, but monstrous. Not human, but bestial. So who was the real Messalina? We'll probably never know for certain. The historical record is too corrupted by propaganda, too distorted by misogyny, too obscured by the passage of 2,000 years. But we can imagine her. A teenage girl forced into marriage with a man 3 times her age. A young woman given the title of empress but denied any real power. A mother whose children would be used as pawns in political games she couldn't control. A human being seeking autonomy in a system designed to deny her any. Did she host orgies? Probably. Did she have affairs? Almost certainly. Did she actually service 25 men in one night? That seems less likely. An exaggeration. Possibly entirely invented. But here's what we know for sure. She lived in a society that celebrated male sexual conquest while demonizing female desire. She was trapped in a loveless political marriage from the age of 16. She was surrounded by former slaves who wielded more real power than she ever could despite her title. And when she finally tried to choose her own path, to marry someone she actually loved, she was murdered for it at 22 years old. Messalina's story isn't really about sex. It's about power, who has it, who wants it, and what happens to women who try to claim it in systems designed to keep them powerless. Her sexuality, whether real or exaggerated, became the weapon used to destroy her. Not her political maneuvering, not her accumulation of influence, not her interference in imperial affairs, but her supposed sexual insatiability. 2,000 years later, we still struggle with this double standard. Women who are sexually autonomous are still often portrayed as threats, as damaged, as somehow less worthy of respect. Men who behave the same way are just being men. Rome called Messalina a monster. But maybe the real monster was the system that gave her everything except the one thing: every human being deserves the right to live life on their own terms. The Empress is dead. The legend lives on. And the question remains, was Messalina Rome's greatest scandal? Or was she simply a woman who refused to be controlled and paid the ultimate price for that refusal? History may never give us a definitive answer, but perhaps asking the question is enough.